In this video, I'm about to show you 25 canned foods you need to avoid like fire, and 10 you should have with you.
Number 25. Cream-based canned soups. Canned cream soups look like a bargain, but when it comes to survival storage, they're one of the worst choices you can make. The big problem? They simply don't last. According to the USDA, low-acid canned foods like soups generally last 2 to 5 years unopened. But cream-based varieties often fall on the shorter end because of the oils, starches, and milk solids. Campbell's, for example, recommends a shelf life of just 2 years for their cream of chicken. Once you crack the lid, the USDA warns you've got 3 to 4 days in the fridge at best before it spoils, useless in a grid-down scenario. Then there's the practicality. A single can of Campbell's cream of mushroom packs 870 milligrams of sodium per half cup. Mind you, there are 2.5 servings per can. Eat the whole thing and you're staring down nearly 2,200 milligrams of sodium, with only about 250 calories and 4 or 5 grams of protein total. That's not survival food, that's wasted space is what that island... And here's the kicker. Over time, fats inside these soups can go rancid, the starches separate into sludge, and the flavor leans metallic. Consumer Reports has documented BPA leaching from soup cans into contents, especially over long storage, raising even more red flags. Bottom line, if you're prepping smart, cream-based soups are a false sense of security in a can. They spoil quickly once opened, they give you little return nutritionally, and when the lights go out, they won't carry you through. Number 24. Canned chili with meat. Canned chili with meat looks rugged on the shelf. The label screams hearty, filling, ready to eat. But let's cut through the hype. In survival terms, this stuff is dead weight. Here's why. A single 15-ounce can of Hormel chili with beans tips in at about 1.1 pounds. For that, you only get around 500 calories, mostly from fat and sodium. Compare that to dry beans or rice, which give you 10 times more calories per pound, last for decades if stored properly, and actually fuel you. Canned chili burns through space and money fast while delivering poor calorie density. Shelf life? Short. Hormel's own guidance gives it about 2 years unopened. That's nothing compared to dried goods or even plain canned beans, which stretch 5 or more. And once you open it, you've got a tiny window about 3 to 4 days refrigerated per USDA before it spoils. No electricity? That chili becomes a liability. The harsh truth is this. Chili with meat feels like a safe bet because it looks hearty, but in practice, it's one of the least efficient canned foods you could rely on. It's heavy, it doesn't store long, and it takes up precious shelf space that could be filled with foods that actually sustain you. Number 23. Pasta meals. Chef Boyardee and SpaghettiOs might trigger childhood memories, quick meals after school, cheap dinners that filled the belly. But stocking them for survival is a mistake. These aren't meals, they're nostalgia in a can, and nostalgia won't keep you alive when things get hard. Let's be blunt, they're built for taste, not endurance. The pasta is already cooked, which means by the time it sits on your shelf for a couple of years, it turns into mushy strings floating in sauce. The sauce itself is mostly sugar and salt. SpaghettiOs carry close to 20 grams of sugar per can, while Chef Boyardee Ravioli runs over 1,200 milligrams of sodium. That's not fuel, that's junk. And here's the trap. Because it looks like a complete meal, people buy cases of it thinking they've covered their bases. In reality, you'd need to eat multiple cans a day just to scrape by on calories, and that would leave you drowning in sodium while still protein deficient. Heavy, bulky, short on value, the exact opposite of what a smart prepper looks for. When it comes down to it, canned pasta meals are dead weight with a smiley face on the label. Don't let the cartoon mascots fool you. Your survival pantry deserves better. Number 22. Fruit in syrup. Canned peaches, pears, fruit cocktails sound wholesome, but if the label says in syrup, what you're really storing is fruit floating in liquid candy. For survival prepping, that's a disaster. Here's why. A standard 1-cup serving of canned peaches in heavy syrup delivers nearly 40 grams of sugar. That's the same as a full can of Coke. Canned pears aren't much better, clocking in at 30 to 35 grams of sugar per cup. And while soda is obvious junk, fruit in syrup tricks you because it looks healthy. But in practice, you're stockpiling nothing more than sugar water with a little fruit texture mixed in. Nutritionally, it's a poor trade. The natural vitamins in fruit are already diminished by the canning process, and the syrup adds nothing except empty calories that spike your blood sugar and leave you crashing later. In survival terms, that means unstable energy when you need steady fuel. And don't forget, syrup cans are heavy. You're hauling around pounds of dead weight that could be replaced with dried fruit, freeze-dried berries, or fruit canned in water, all of which last longer and actually nourish you. So bottom line being, canned fruit in syrup is a sweet trap. It eats your shelf space, loads you with sugar, and leaves you weaker, not stronger, when it matters most. Number 21. Armour Vienna sausages. Pop the lid on a can of Vienna sausages, and what you see isn't hearty meat, it's a row of pale, spongy cylinders sitting in salty liquid. The label tells the story. One 4.6-ounce can carries around 1,080 milligrams of sodium, 13 grams of fat, and only 10 grams of protein. For a prepper, that's a bad trade. More salt and grease than useful calories. And the ingredients? These aren't cuts of beef or pork. They're usually mechanically separated chicken and pork, meaning scraps and connective tissue ground into a paste. To keep it shelf stable, manufacturers load it with sodium nitrite, a curing agent the World Health Organization has even linked to cancer when eaten regularly in processed meats. Even the storage benefit is overhyped. Armour lists a best buy date at around 2 years, far shorter than beans or rice, and once the can is open, the USDA says you've got only 3 to 4 days refrigerated. Without power, you're looking at spoilage in no time. So while they might look like compact protein for emergencies, canned sausages are really just chemicals and scraps disguised as meat, something you'll regret stacking when you need real food. Number 20. Spam ham. Were you expecting this one? I honestly wasn't, mainly due to the fact Spam has a reputation. It fed our soldiers in World War II, it became a cultural icon in Hawaii, and it's still stacked high on supermarket shelves. But unfortunately, nostalgia and history don't make it good survival food. Take Spam Classic. 2 ounces, just a couple forkfuls, packs 790 milligrams of sodium, 16 grams of fat, and 7 grams of protein. Eat the whole 12-ounce can and you're choking down around 2,300 milligrams of sodium in one hit, which is the American Heart Association's recommended limit for an entire day. That much salt without plenty of water in storage? That's a serious problem. And while Spam can technically sit unopened for 2 to 5 years, it's not invincible. Stored in a hot garage or shed and the fat inside can separate, leaving you with meat that smells rancid before its best buy date. Once you open it, the USDA makes it clear. Treat it like any other cooked meat, 3 to 4 days refrigerated, or it's unsafe. For preppers, here's the catch. Spam feels like a rock-solid protein anchor, but really it's a short-term filler, heavy on salt and fat, light on actual sustenance. It might make sense for flavor variety, but building your emergency shelf around it is like building a bunker out of cardboard it won't hold up when it matters. Number 19. Cheeseburger in a can. There are gimmicks, and then there's the canned cheeseburger. A Swiss company first rolled it out back in 2008, promising a full burger experience sealed in tin. Bun, patty, cheese, sauce, the whole package. On paper, it sounds almost clever. Meat, carbs, and fat, all in one container. In practice, it's the kind of food you regret buying the moment you taste it. The numbers alone should make a prepper think twice. One can clocks in at around 534 calories, but carries nearly 4,000 milligrams of sodium, close to double what most health agencies say you should eat in an entire day. Protein sits at about 26 grams, which isn't terrible, but you're paying for it with a salt load that would leave you thirstier than a V8 after a long run. In any crisis where water is limited, that's the last thing you want. Then comes the quality. Reports from people who've tried these burgers are brutal. The bun turns soggy, the patty is mushy, and the whole thing tastes more like salty pet food than a cheeseburger? Scratch that. Don't even give this to your pet as food. Sure, it's shelf stable for a while, but once opened it behaves like any perishable. It spoils fast without refrigeration. As survival food, the canned cheeseburger isn't just a joke. It's a dangerous distraction. Heavy, inefficient, and barely edible, it wastes space you should be filling with food that actually works when it counts. Number 18. Ravioli and/or lasagna. Crack open a can of ravioli or lasagna, and you expect comfort food, rich pasta, hearty sauce, maybe a little beef for substance. What you actually get is a bowl of soft noodles swimming in salty tomato paste with barely a whisper of protein. It's more marketing in a can than a meal in a can. Look at Chef Boyardee beef ravioli. One 15-ounce can has about 1,060 milligrams of sodium and only 7 grams of protein in the entire serving. For comparison, that's the same sodium load as a fast food cheeseburger but with half the protein. The rest of the calories, roughly 250 to 300 per can, come mostly from refined flour and cheap oils. In survival terms, that's a terrible deal. You're burning shelf space on food that fills your stomach but doesn't fuel your body. And don't let the meat on the label fool you. That patty crumble inside is often mechanically processed beef byproduct, bulked up with soy protein and artificial flavors. Even unopened, it's shelf-stable for maybe 2 years before the texture starts breaking down into mush. Once opened, USDA says you've got only a few days in the fridge, and in a power outage, it's worthless. In short, canned ravioli and lasagna pretend to be meals. They're really just pasta filler and salty sauce, dressed up in Italian names, offering little more than empty carbs when you actually need food that counts. Number 17. Meatballs in sauce. A can of meatballs and tomato sauce feels like it should be a safe bet. Protein from the meat, carbs from the sauce, ready to eat in minutes. But the closer you look, the more you realize it's a hollow promise. Start with the meat itself. Those beef or pork balls are usually a mash of mechanically separated scraps, soy protein concentrate, breadcrumbs, and preservatives molded into shape. The USDA somehow allows this, but it means you're eating filler first, meat second. The sauce doesn't save it either. A 15-ounce can of great value meatballs in sauce, for example, hits you with nearly 1,200 milligrams of sodium and 10 to 12 grams of added sugar. That's basically candy-coated meat paste, not fuel for long-term survival. Then there's the practicality. One can delivers only about 300 to 350 calories total, but weighs close to a pound. Compare that to beans or rice, which can give you 5 to 10 times the calorie density per pound and last far longer. Even unopened, the meatballs are good for maybe 2 years before texture and flavor start breaking down. Once the can's open, you've got the usual 3 to 4 days in the fridge before it spoils, a death sentence if there's no electricity. The truth is simple. Canned meatballs and sauce are a prepper's illusion. They look hearty, but they're really just sugar, salt, and scraps, packaged as protein, a waste of precious shelf space when survival actually counts. Number 16. Pie filling. Imagine the following. The grid goes down, you're digging through your stash, and instead of beans or tuna, you pull out a can of cherry pie filling. In that moment, you'll realize you didn't stock survival food, you stocked dessert. Crack the can and it's obvious what you're dealing with. A thick, neon red syrup where the fruit is more of a garnish than the star. A single cup delivers around 32 grams of sugar, about as much as a candy bar, and barely 160 calories total. Vitamins? Almost nothing. Protein? Forget it. You could eat the whole pound heavy can and still be starving for real fuel. But the most surprising part is that this stuff takes up the same space as beans, rice, or oats, foods that deliver thousands of calories per pound and keep you standing when things get rough. Pie filling? It'll give you a sugar rush, a crash, and sticky teeth. Once opened, it spoils in a matter of days, which makes it useless without refrigeration. Being completely honest to ourselves, pie filling has one job: to sit on a shelf until Thanksgiving. As survival food, it's just laughable. If that's what you're counting on, you're not prepping, you're planning a bake sale. Number 15. Pudding. If pie filling is dessert pretending to be survival food, canned pudding is comfort food gone horribly wrong. The idea sounds cozy. Chocolate or vanilla pudding waiting for you in a can, a sweet little treat when times are tough. But reality hits the second you open one. The glossy surface hides a dense, gelatinous sludge that smells more like tin than dessert. Nutritionally, it's about what you'd expect. A single cup of canned pudding delivers around 25 to 30 grams of sugar, 200 calories, and barely any protein. It's dairy without the benefit of fresh calcium, carbs without real fuel, and fat that separates as it sits. USDA guidelines say it's safe for about 18 months unopened, but even then the texture starts to break down, and once the seal is cracked, you've got 3 to 4 days in the fridge before it turns sour, which makes it useless if you don't have power. Then there's the weight problem. A can runs close to a pound, but you're only hauling a couple hundred empty calories less than you'd get from a small handful of peanuts. Preppers counting on this for morale food are fooling themselves. It's heavy, it spoils, and it tastes worse the longer it sits. In the end, canned pudding is a comfort illusion sweet for a second, but a total waste of shelf space when survival is on the line. Number 14. Bacon. Bacon has its place. In a skillet on Sunday morning, sizzling and crisp. But in a can? That's where the dream dies. Canned bacon is basically strips of pork packed in grease, rolled up like a greasy carpet and shoved into a tin. It sounds like a prepper's fantasy. Real meat with a long shelf life, but it's one of the biggest letdowns you can stack. Take Yoder's canned bacon, one of the few brands still around. Each can contains about 3,000 calories total, but nearly 250 grams of fat and over 12,000 milligrams of sodium. That's more than 5 days worth of salt in one container. Sure, it'll technically sit on your shelf for 10 years unopened, but that's marketing optimism. Heat and time make the fat go rancid faster, giving it a sour smell even before the date runs out. And once you crack the can, USDA rules apply, just a few days in the fridge before it spoils. The worst part? The texture. People who've tried it actually describe it as limp, oily strips that taste more like salty leather than bacon. If you're prepping for morale food, this isn't the answer. It's heavy, messy, and delivers way more salt and fat than usable protein. In a crisis, canned bacon is a cruel joke. A can full of grease pretending to be survival meat. Number 13. Gravy. Let's be honest. Who out there is really stocking gravy as part of their survival plan? Believe it or not, some folks do. I did some digging around, and lo and behold, you'll see gravy mentioned as a so-called morale food, something to make rice, beans, or potatoes less boring when the lights go out. The idea is understandable. Comfort matters. But if your emergency shelf is stacked with cans of gravy, you've been sold a fantasy, not a survival strategy. Take Campbell's turkey gravy. Half a cup carries about 860 milligrams of sodium, and the whole can hits around 1,700 milligrams. Calories? Only about 50 per serving. Protein, fiber, vitamins? Next to nothing. In other words, you're dedicating valuable shelf space to salty water with a little starch mixed in. When you're supposed to be storing calories and real nutrition, gravy gives you neither. And the stuff doesn't even hold up well. Canned gravies rely on starches and oils for texture, and over time they separate, leaving behind a watery, metallic-tasting gel. Open a can, and USDA guidelines kick in. 3 to 4 days refrigerated or it spoils. In a power outage, that clock runs out fast. So sure, some people keep gravy for comfort. But in an actual emergency, it's dead weight. If you want morale food, keep chocolate or coffee. Gravy belongs at Thanksgiving, not in your bug-out pantry. Number 12. Mac and cheese. Mac and cheese is supposed to be the king of comfort food. The kind of thing you eat when you're broke, sad, or just want to feel human again. Now picture that same dish sealed in a can. You don't get golden noodles bathed in creamy cheese. You get a sad clump of pasta swimming in a fluorescent sauce that smells more like chemicals than cheddar. Let's check the damage. 1 can of Chef Boyardee mac. Cheese runs about 300 calories, almost 950 milligrams of sodium per cup, and a measly 8 grams of protein. That's a terrible deal for survival food. You're basically paying shelf rent for salty noodles and fake cheese. And the cheese? Forget the block of cheddar you shred at home. This cheese is whey powder, processed oils, and stabilizers designed to last through canning. The result after a year or two on the shelf is a sauce that looks like it lost the will to live, oily, grainy, and nothing close to comfort. So yeah, you can stock canned mac and cheese if you want. Just don't expect warmth and nostalgia. Expect disappointment in a can dressed up with a cartoon label. Number 11. Canned mushrooms. Mushrooms are already one of those foods people either love or hate. Me personally, love them, especially when I go to Longhorn Steakhouse. But in a can? that's a whole different level of disappointment. Pop the lid, and what greets you isn't earthy, firm mushrooms. It's a pale, rubbery heap that tastes more like the can than the fungus. Nutritionally, you're not getting much for the trouble. A half cup of canned mushrooms delivers maybe 15 to 20 calories, a couple grams of protein, and that's about it. For survival storage, that's laughable. You're dedicating shelf space to food that offers less energy than a stick of gum. Worse, they're usually packed in brine, so along with those ghost white slices comes about 400 milligrams of sodium per serving. Salt water with a little texture, basically. And the texture? Mushy, rubbery, sometimes slimy. Fresh mushrooms may not last long, but at least they taste like food. Freeze-dried mushrooms can hold their shape for years and actually bring flavor back when rehydrated. The canned version just degrades into chewy nothingness. So here's the real question. In an emergency, are you really going to reach for a can of soggy mushrooms when beans, rice, or tuna are sitting right there? Didn't think so. Number 10. Canned mixed vegetables. Mixed vegetables in a can look like the smart choice. A little bit of everything, right? Carrots for vision, peas for protein, corn for energy. The label makes it feel like a multivitamin in tin form. But in practice, it's one of the weakest backup foods you can buy. The problem starts with the numbers. A half-cup serving is barely 50 calories with 1 to 2 grams of protein, yet it still carries around 400 to 500 milligrams of sodium thanks to the brine it swims in. By the time you finish the can, you've burned through almost a third of your daily sodium allowance for fewer calories than a single slice of bread. That's not survival fuel, that's smoke and mirrors. And don't forget how these blends are built. Companies pad them with cheap starches like potatoes and lima beans, drowning out the corn and carrots the label shows off. Store them a couple years and the colors fade, textures collapse, and you end up with beige mush that tastes like tin. So while canned mixed veggies might look like variety, what they really give you is a false sense of nutrition. If you're prepping, spend that shelf space on food that actually keeps you alive, not a can of underwhelming leftovers. Number 9. Beef stew. On the shelf, beef stew in a can looks like the jackpot. The picture on the label shows big chunks of beef, tender potatoes, colorful carrots, the kind of thing that warms you up after a hard day. In reality, what you get when you crack it open is a greasy soup with rubbery meat floating in salty gravy. Take Dinty Moore, the most famous of the bunch. 1 cup brings about 410 calories, nearly 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and over 20 grams of fat. Sounds filling, until you realize the whole 20-ounce can leaves you with close to 2,000 milligrams of sodium in one sitting. That's your entire daily limit gone in a single bowl, and good luck balancing that when clean water might be scarce. And the texture, that's where the stew really betrays you. The beef cubes don't stay hearty, they turn spongy, like chewing on a rubber eraser. The vegetables fare no better, potatoes dissolve into paste, carrots lose all bite, and the gravy separates into an oily layer that coats your mouth. So yes, canned stew looks like survival comfort food. But when you need real fuel, it's nothing more than a heavy can of salt and disappointment dressed up with a pretty label. Number 8. Lard-based beans. Here's the thing about canned refried beans. They trick you. The word beans makes you think survival staple. Protein, fiber, hearty fuel, all true if we're talking dried beans. But once you mash them up with lard and stuff them in a can, they stop being a prepper's dream and start being dead weight. First problem, that lard. Fat might make them taste good with a plate of tacos, but it kills long-term stability. Dry beans can sit in a bucket for a decade and still cook up fine. Lard-based refrieds, you're lucky to squeeze out 2 or 3 years before the fat starts to go funky, especially if your storage isn't climate controlled. Second problem, efficiency. A can of refried beans weighs a pound and change, but once you scrape out the contents, you're left with about 350 calories and a wallop of sodium. Compare that to the thousands of calories per pound you'd get from dry beans or rice, and it's not even close. You're hauling brine, fat, and filler, not survival fuel. So yes, canned refrieds have their place if you want a quick side dish on taco night. But if you're building an emergency pantry, stocking them is like bringing a piñata to a gunfight. Fun in the moment, but useless when things get serious. Number 7. Breakfast sausages. Breakfast sausage should be the food that makes a morning. The sizzle in the pan, The scrambled eggs, the smell of pancakes that drifts through the house, the bite of spice in every mouthful when biting in the sausage. That's what people picture when they toss canned sausages into their cart. But open that can, and the fantasy ends quickly. What you get isn't golden brown patties, it's pale, rubbery links floating in salty broth. They don't crisp, they don't smell like breakfast, and no matter how you fry them, they taste like someone tried to can nostalgia and missed by a mile. And here's the cruel part. Preppers buy these thinking, meat equals strength, but each little link is more salt than substance. A small can can load you with close to a day's worth of sodium while offering only scraps of protein in return. In a real crisis, that kind of trade leaves you thirstier, weaker, and burning through storage space you can't afford to waste. Canned breakfast sausages don't bring comfort. They bring disappointment dressed up like survival food. They're a memory of what breakfast used to taste like, and a reminder of why you shouldn't bank on the can. Number 6. Canned fish in sauces. Canned fish is supposed to be simple. Open, drain, eat. Protein that lasts years with no fuss. But then the food companies got clever. Why not dress it up? Let's throw salmon in teriyaki, tuna in curry, mackerel in chili sauce. It looks fancy, like you've upgraded your stash with a touch of class. In reality, it's smoke and mirrors. Those sauces aren't doing you any favors. Teriyaki salmon, for example, often carries 600 to 700 milligrams of sodium per serving and up to 10 grams of sugar. That's dessert levels of junk calories slapped on top of fish that would have been fine on its own, and the longer it sits, the worse it gets. Sweet sauces break down, oils separate, and what started as gourmet protein ends up looking like fish and syrup. The marketing makes these cans feel special, like variety in hard times. But if you're prepping smart, variety shouldn't come from a sugary sauce that spoils faster than the fish itself. It should come from food that actually lasts. Plain tuna, plain salmon, even sardines in water will keep you fed. The sauced versions? They're just culinary cosplay, and in a crisis cosplay won't cut it. Number 5. Canned olives. Every prepper has that one shelf mistake. The can they bought not because it made sense, but because it looked smart. For a lot of folks, that can is olives. They sit there in their brine, sleek and dark, looking like sophistication in a tin. But when you break it down, they're garnish food, not survival food. A typical serving of canned black olives is 25 calories with about 2 grams of fat, virtually no protein, and around 350 milligrams of sodium. Eat the whole can and you've still only racked up about 150 calories total, barely a snack while dumping close to 2,000 milligrams of sodium into your system. That's almost your entire day's salt allowance, in exchange for less energy than a granola bar. And once the can is open, USDA guidelines give you 3 to 4 days refrigerated before they spoil. Without refrigeration, they'll go bad even faster. Unopened, they'll hold for about 18 to 24 months, which sounds decent until you realize dry staples like rice or beans last a decade or more. Olives have their place, martinis, charcuterie boards, maybe pizza night, but in survival storage, they're a theater prop. They look classy on the shelf, but when it's time to eat, they give you nothing that matters. Number 4. Pickled foods. When people see the word pickled, they assume it means forever. Vinegar, salt, the oldest tricks in the book for keeping food from rotting. But don't let that fool you. In a can, pickled foods are a false sense of security. Take pickled beets. A whole cup has maybe 50 calories and almost no protein, but close to 400 milligrams of sodium. That's nothing but sour water with color. Pickled eggs sound tougher, and they do have about 70 calories and 6 grams of protein each, but the catch is shelf life. Most commercial cans or jars barely stretch to 3 to 6 months, not years like beans or rice. In other words, by the time you actually need them, they'll already be past their prime. And here's the irony. You're not even storing food, you're storing liquid. Open one of these cans and you'll see it. Most of the weight is brine, not fuel. And once that seal is broken, USDA rules apply. A few days in the fridge or it's done. No fridge? That jar of eggs becomes compost in record time. Pickled foods might look like a prepper's trick, but they're really just vinegar illusions. They take up space, offer almost nothing back, and vanish before you ever need them. Number 3. Cheese products. If there's one can that exposes how far food science will go to fake it, it's canned cheese. Call it easy cheese, nacho cheese sauce, whatever. It's less dairy and more chemistry set. In a survival stash, that's not an edge. That's a liability. Take spray cheese. 2 tablespoons, the recommended serving pack, around 90 calories, 6 grams of fat, and about 450 milligrams of sodium. Problem is, nobody eats just 2 tablespoons. Empty half the can in one sitting and you've just blown through 1,000+ milligrams of salt for what? Processed oil and powdered milk solids whipped with emulsifiers to look like food. Protein barely registers. Nacho cheese sauce doesn't save the day either. A single cup piles on 300 calories, 20 grams of fat, and over 1,500 milligrams of sodium, nearly your daily limit in salt, with no staying power. And, unlike real hard cheese, which can age for years, canned cheese products limp along for maybe 12 to 18 months unopened. Once opened, you've got days before the flavor turns sour and the texture separates into oily sludge. Preppers sometimes toss these in for variety, but variety isn't worth shelf space if the food is fake from the start. Canned cheese isn't survival fuel, it's a joke in a pressurized can, more suited for topping crackers at a tailgate than keeping you alive when things get serious. Number 2. Creamed corn. Here's the thing about creamed corn. It pretends to be useful. You see corn on the label and think hearty staple, something that'll stick with you when times get rough. But pop the lid and what you actually get is half kernels, half yellow sludge, food that looks like it gave up before you even ate it. A full cup gives you maybe 180 calories, with just 3 grams of protein hiding in all that starch and sugar. That's not survival fuel, that's side dish filler dressed up like a meal. You could clear out an entire can and still be hungry, only thirstier from the sodium load. Compare that to a sack of dried beans or rice, and it's embarrassing how little you're getting for the same shelf space. And here's the kicker. It doesn't even age well. Over time, the cream separates, the kernels collapse into mush, and the can takes on that sharp metallic bite that makes you second guess eating it at all. Once opened, you've got 3 days in the fridge or it's rancid. No fridge? You're dumping it within 24 hours! Creamed corn isn't survival food. It's comfort food's sloppy cousin, fine on a holiday plate, a dead weight in your pantry. If you're prepping smart, leave this one on the supermarket shelf. Number 1. Sweetened condensed milk. Milk in a can sounds like prepper magic, doesn't it? No fridge needed, high calories, comfort in liquid form. But sweetened condensed milk is a survival trap. What you're really buying is sugar sludge with a splash of dairy. A single 2 tablespoon serving, and let's be honest, nobody stops at 2 tablespoons, delivers around 130 calories, 22 grams of sugar, and only 3 grams of protein. Eat the whole 14-ounce can and you're looking at nearly 1,300 calories, but almost all of it straight sugar. That's a blood sugar roller coaster, not steady fuel. Shelf life is another problem. Unopened, most brands top out at 12 to 18 months before quality drops. Compare that to dry milk powder, which can stretch a decade if stored right. And once you crack it open, the USDA gives you 2 to 3 days in the fridge before it spoils. No fridge? That can turn rancid fast, exactly when you can't afford to waste food. Sweetened condensed milk works fine for baking, coffee, or desserts when life is normal. But in a crisis, it's not nutrition, it's candy in a can. If you're stacking shelves for survival, leave this one at the supermarket. However, not all is negative, as there exists canned foods in which many might overlook, but are lifesavers in dire situations, starting with number 10. Tuna. If there's one can that's earned its place in survival pantries for decades, it's tuna. Cheap, compact, and packed with real protein, this is one of the few canned foods that actually pulls its weight when it matters. A standard 5-ounce can of tuna in water gives you about 120 calories and 26 grams of protein. That's pure fuel with almost no wasted space. Go with tuna in olive oil and you're doubling the calories for the same protein, which means more staying power per can. In survival terms, that's efficiency. Protein for muscle, fat for energy, both in a can that lasts. Shelf life? Solid. Most tuna is rated for 3 to 5 years unopened, and as long as it's stored cool and dry, it often keeps even longer. Compare that to fresh fish, which spoils in hours. and you start to see why tuna has been a military and prepper staple for generations. And it's versatile. You can eat it straight from the can, mix it with rice, toss it into pasta, or spread it on crackers. No heating required, no gimmicks, just ready-to-go nutrition that doesn't mock you when you actually need it. The bottom line being, canned tuna isn't fancy, but it's reliable. If you're building a shelf that lasts, this one deserves a front row spot. Number 9. Salmon. Tuna might get all the spotlight, but canned salmon is the real sleeper hit in survival storage. It doesn't look like much sitting on the shelf, but crack one open and you've got a can that quietly outclasses most of the competition. For starters, it's not just protein, though you do get a solid 22 to 24 grams per serving. What makes salmon different is the extras. The edible bones in canned salmon are rich in calcium, something you won't find in most other canned proteins. Add omega-3 fatty acids on top, the kind that keep your heart and brain running strong, and suddenly that can isn't just food, it's long-term insurance. Shelf life? About 3 to 5 years unopened, and it keeps its nutrition even after sitting for a while. Once opened, it's the same USDA rule as tuna. A few days in the fridge. But here's the beauty. You can eat it cold straight from the can, mix it with beans, or drop it into a stew, and it doesn't taste like punishment. People stock tuna by the case, but salmon deserves space too. It's protein, calcium, and healthy fats in one package, the kind of can that actually gives you something back when every bite counts. Number 8. Chicken breast. Canned chicken breast isn't glamorous. It doesn't have the gourmet tag of salmon or the old school cred of tuna. What it does have is reliability. Think Toyota. My Corolla is still going strong after years, and in a survival pantry, chicken breast is that reliable source. No flash though. Pop open a 12.5-ounce can and you're looking at around 180 calories, 38 grams of protein, and almost no fat. That's lean fuel, pure and simple. Unlike fatty meats that load you down with salt and grease, canned chicken gives you the kind of clean protein your body can actually use to rebuild and keep going. And it does it without burning through your calorie budget on junk. The shelf life runs 2 to 5 years unopened, and once you crack it open, you treat it like any other cooked meat. 3 to 4 days in the fridge or it's done. But here's where it shines. Versatility. You can shred it into rice, toss it into beans, make quick sandwiches, or just eat it straight out of the can if you need to. No gimmicks, no wasted filler, just meat that works. Canned chicken breast is the blue-collar can of survival food. Not exciting, not pretty, but when everything else runs out, this is the can that'll keep you standing. Number 7. Sardines. Sardines are the can everyone loves to hate. Small, oily, smelly, the kind of thing people joke about leaving for the cat. But here's the funny twist. In a survival stash, sardines are the can that makes everything else look weak. Crack one open, and you've got over 20 grams of protein and around 200 calories in a single tiny can. Go for the olive oil packed version, and you're adding healthy fats that push it closer to 230 calories, real staying power in a package you can slip in your pocket. And, unlike tuna or chicken, sardines come with their bones intact. Sounds gross, but those bones are edible and loaded with calcium, giving you a nutrient you're probably not getting anywhere else once the milk runs out. The best part? They're apocalypse-proof. Unopened, they'll ride out 3 to 5 years on your shelf without breaking a sweat, and when you need them, there's no prep. No heating, no draining, just peel and eat. Smell strong? Sure, but that smell is nutrition, omega-3s, and survival fuel packed into a can most people overlook. In short, laugh at sardines all you want. When shelves go bare, the ugly little can you mocked might be the smartest thing you ever stocked. Number 6. Beans. Beans aren't glamorous. Nobody brags about stacking cases of black beans the way they might talk up canned salmon or some novelty survival chili. But here's the truth. Beans are the backbone of a real prepper pantry. They don't just sit there. They hold the whole system together. Crack open a can of black, kidney, pinto, or garbanzos, and you're looking at around 300 to 350 calories per can with 15 to 20 grams of protein and a solid wall of fiber. That's the trifecta. Fuel to keep you going, protein to keep your muscles from burning out, and fiber to keep your gut working when everything else in your stash is meat, starch, and salt. And here's the kicker. They actually fill you up. Eat a can of beans and you won't be prowling the shelves an hour later looking for something else. shelf life is reliable, 2 to 5 years unopened. And they don't degrade into sludge the way fatty meats or creamy soups do. Once opened, you've got the same 3 to 4 day window in the fridge, but beans mix into just about anything: rice, soups, stews, even mashed into spreads. They stretch meals, they balance out the fun cans, and they're about as close as you get to real staples in a can. Beans don't make headlines, but without them, your stash is all show and no foundation. They're the bricks, the concrete, the stuff that actually keeps you standing. Number 5. Lentils. Lentils don't exactly scream survival food. They're small, brown, and about as plain looking as it gets. Most shoppers pass them by without a second thought. But here's the twist. Lentils quietly beat a lot of the big-name cans people rush to stack. Take the numbers. 1 cup of canned lentils gives you around 180 calories, 12 grams of protein, and 15 grams of fiber. That's lean fuel and gut health in the same scoop. Not bad for something most folks dismiss as bland. And unlike beans, which demand long cook times if you're working from dried, lentils are practically grab and go. Pop the can, eat them cold if you need to, or toss them into rice and soup and they'll carry you farther than you think. Storage-wise, they hold up about 2 to 5 years unopened, same as beans. Once opened, you've got the usual 3 to 4 days refrigerated window. The difference is, they don't need heavy seasoning or long simmering to be palatable. They're already mild and versatile. Lentils don't get the spotlight. But in a real crisis, that quiet little can could end up being the MVP of your pantry, the steady performer everyone underestimated. Number 4. Pumpkin. Here's one you probably didn't expect to make the cut. Canned pumpkin. Most people think of it as seasonal. Cue the Starbucks pumpkin spice latte, or something you dust off once a year for pie. But in survival storage, it's one of the most underrated cans you can grab. A single cup of pure pumpkin packs only 80 calories, but you're getting 7 grams of fiber, 2 grams of protein, and a wall of micronutrients, including over 200% of your daily vitamin A. That's vision, immunity, and skin health covered in one shot. And unlike a lot of veggie cans that turn mushy and tasteless, pumpkin actually holds up well in recipes. It thickens soups, stretches stews, and even works as a base for bread or pancakes if you're baking off-grid. Shelf life is solid too. Unopened cans last 2 to 5 years, and once opened, they'll hold for about 3 to 4 days in the fridge. No fridge? You'll need to use it quickly, but the good news is, it's versatile enough to disappear into meals fast. Pumpkin isn't the can you brag about stacking, but when the shelves are bare and you need fiber, vitamins, and hydration in one package, that orange can suddenly look like survival gold. Number 3. Tomatoes. Here's the thing about canned tomatoes. They're not the star of the show, but they make the show possible. 1 can of beans? Fine. A scoop of rice? Boring. But crack open a can of tomatoes, and suddenly you've got stew, chili, pasta, soup, a real meal instead of random pantry scraps. That's why preppers who know what they're doing always keep them around. Nutritionally, tomatoes punch above their weight. A cup of canned diced tomatoes has only about 40 calories, but you're getting vitamin C, vitamin K, potassium, and antioxidants like lycopene, the stuff that keeps your immune system sharp when stress is high. And unlike delicate veggies that lose everything in processing, tomatoes actually hold on to a lot of their nutrients, with lycopene levels even increasing from the cooking and canning process. Shelf life? Solid. Most brands last 18 to 24 months unopened, and some will keep flavor and nutrition beyond that if stored cool. Once opened, it's the standard 3 to 4 days in the fridge, but the real value is how far one can stretches. A single 15-ounce can transform plain beans, pasta, or rice into something hearty, food you actually want to eat, not just tolerate. Canned tomatoes aren't flash, but they're the glue that holds a prepper's meal plan together. Without them, your pantry is a pile of parts. With them, you've got dinner. Number 2, carrots. Canned carrots are the dorky kid of the pantry. Nobody invites them to the party, nobody stacks them to brag, and honestly, most people only buy them by accident. But here's the twist. When things go sideways, that awkward little can turns into the one that keeps you standing. Crack one open and you don't just get soggy orange coins. You get 35 calories a cup, fiber to keep your gut moving, and a ridiculous 300% of your daily vitamin A. That's eyesight, immunity, and skin health packed into a can everyone ignores. In other words, they're the nerdy multivitamin of the prepper shelf, not flashy, but indispensable when the cool cans burn out. Shelf life is 2 to 3 years unopened, and once opened, you've got the standard 3 to 4 days in the fridge. They're already soft, which means no wasted fuel cooking. Just toss them into rice, beans, or stew and call it dinner. So yeah, canned carrots aren't sexy. They won't win you likes on social media prepper tours. But when the salt bombs and grease cans wear you down, that little orange nerd will be the one holding you together. Number 1. Peas. Canned peas don't have the muscle of beans or the reputation of tuna. What they do have is something just as important in survival: comfort. Crack a can and suddenly you're reminded of meatloaf dinners, shepherd's pie, and those plain but familiar meals you grew up with. In a crisis, that kind of morale boost matters more than people realize. Nutritionally, they're no slouch either. A cup of canned peas gives you about 120 calories, 8 grams of protein and 7 grams of fiber, plus iron, vitamin C, and a good shot of vitamin K. That's far better than most canned veggies, which usually bring little more than color and salt water. Peas actually fuel you, not just decorate your plate. Shelf life runs around 2 to 5 years unopened, and once opened, they keep for the usual 3 to 4 days in the fridge. They're soft straight from the can, so you can toss them into rice, stretch out a soup, or just eat them cold in a pinch. Canned peas aren't glamorous, but they're reliable, filling, and familiar. When you're eating from a shelf instead of a stove, sometimes it's the little green can that makes the whole situation feel human again.